Welcome back. Last week, after we finished filming our episode of Tokyo on Fire, somebody in the Imperial household announced that the emperor would like to abdicate his position as Emperor of Japan. This is huge news. It's had a huge rippling effect. Michael, what's your take on that?
My take is that the emperor is an old man, and he's worked very, very hard to reestablish the imperial house as something that the Japanese people are focused on and can respect and do respect tremendously.
Before we go into it too much, Michael, we have to point out that this subject is basically taboo in Japanese society, right? I mean, people don't talk about this sort of thing. It's not a general conversation. People who are writing stories about it have to be very careful about what they say.
There's always that, and I fail to see how after 70 years, the issue of whether Emperor Hirohito was involved in the expansion of Japan or not, that every mention of the imperial family has to focus back on that.
I don't think that's the issue at all.
But I think it is, because whenever you start talking about something like abdication, they start talking about, well, you know, Hirohito after World War II, and you say, what does that have to do with anything? And yet, Japanese commentators immediately switch into that mode. Mm-hmm. It's almost like there's an automatic button that goes on. The moment the imperial family is mentioned, they start talking about war responsibility.
I don't know. I think that's a fly in the ointment. I think the real issue here is his Godhead. You know, I mean, the respect and the admiration that the entire nation has for this individual, for this institution, I think is somewhat sacrosanct. And so the people are really reluctant to really say one thing or the other, waiting for the word to come down from heaven.
Well, that's assuming that people believe in his deity. Now, there are persons, even elected officials, who argue that he is indeed divine. The majority of Japanese people do not believe it. The present emperor's father, in fact, renounced his divinity as part of his deal, right, to get out of being charged as a war criminal. That he was no longer a god. Thank you. And this current emperor is absolutely adamant about his commoner status, so much so that he, in fact, has renounced the imperial right to a tomb, mm-hmm, and instead is going to be cremated just like everybody else.
How about that? That's
big. That right to be entombed is extremely controlled in Japan, in Japanese law. The only persons who are allowed to be entombed are the imperial family and members of the Islamic faith. Mm-hmm. Everybody else, by law, is cremated. But the emperor says, hey, I'm just one Japanese among many. My wife and I, when we pass on, we're not going to have ornate tombs like they had in Hachioji here for the previous, the Hirohito, and for the Taisho emperor. We're not going to do that. We're just going to have a small grave, and we're both going to be cremated. And that's just like everybody else. Mm-hmm. He is the people's emperor, much more so than his father was. He is absolutely loved for his very, very common touch. And indeed, when the great disaster happened of 3/11, it was not the prime minister or any member of the Diet that made the national message, that delivered the national message, we're going to be okay. It was the emperor, for the first time, came live on television, had never had a live broadcast ever. After the initial rescue and recovery efforts had gotten underway, he went on and said, we're going to get through this. People of Japan, we have suffered a great thing. The imperial family is, for its common touch, respected. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's the divinity side at all.
Let's talk about the real issues of abdication, the critical logistic issues of abdication, what that involves, what responsibilities he has as emperor, the laws that need to be changed, the fact that you have to actually change the calendar.
Oh yeah, well the thing is about changing the calendar, when an emperor dies, that also changes the calendar. Big whoop-de-hoo. Mm-hmm. We still are going to have the alternative Western calendar. It's 2016 next to it, so it doesn't matter what the reign name is. They're already done with that. There are laws that have to be changed. The imperial house law will have to be changed to allow abdication. But it's not as though abdication didn't exist in Japanese history. It does. And in fact, during a significant part of the medieval period, there would be multiple retired emperors piled up on top of each other. And then the emperor would be like a 4 or 5 or 6-year-old child. Mm-hmm. And then this whole stream of other folks who had just been in office for 10 years.
I don't want to do it, you do it.
Yeah, passing it on. This is not something that is new in Japanese history. Mm-hmm. But those who are really intent on elevating the imperial family to some kind of exalted status beyond that of simply a ruler on earth, yeah, for them it's tough. But otherwise, it's a matter of getting people in the Diet to agree to allow the emperor to abdicate. And, there are much more difficult things politically than to do than that.
But logistically, assuming that the emperor abdicates, his son would become the emperor then.
Yeah, there is an issue in terms of succession because until now, the terminology that's in the law has a name for the heir to the throne, which indicates that the person is the son. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, the heir to the throne would not become the son because there is no son. The current crown prince does not have a son. He has a single daughter, Aiko-sama. The heir to the throne is his brother, right, Akishino. And so a new term would have to be worked out to be included in the law because he could not be called Kotaishi, which is the son of the current emperor. He isn't. So there are technical details. You're right.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is just fascinating. The longest imperial line in human history is going through some significant changes. Please stay tuned.